Howdy folks, and welcome back to part 3 in my Bad Boys of BADAB tutorial series, where I paint up the entire Red Corsairs Battleforce box, courtesy of Games Workshop. Thank you very much for sending me this. This is the 3rd squad in the series, and what I've done so far is I've painted up the squad of Terminators in 5 different schemes from the BADAB War, and I've also painted up the Red Corsairs Raiders in a similar fashion, splitting the 10 Raiders into 5 different chapters from the BADAB War. The headcanon and lore behind this series as that these are all chapters from the BADAB War that were involved in the BADAB War on either side, and they've all gone renegade. So this is sort of an alternate version of events here, and all of these guys are bad guys. What I've done in this video is got the 10 Chaos Legionaries from this box and kitbashed them together with the remaining parts of the Red Corsairs Raiders models, including things like the Mark 6 and 7 helms, as well as bolt guns and arms, etc., to make these guys look slightly less chaosy, but still reading as renegades overall. The 5 chapters we're going to be looking at here today are the Howling Griffons, the Sons of Medusa, the Nova Marines, the Star Phantoms, and the Firehawks. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Now, I've primed my miniatures with different sprays, the lighter colors like the Howling Griffons, the Nova Marines, as well as the Star Phantoms I've primed with Wraithbone spray. The other 2 I've primed with Chaos Black spray. Starting things off with the Howling Griffons, these guys are an awesome looking chapter. They are quartered with red and yellow. So we're going to start with a light white or Wraithbone base coat here, and we're going to use yellow and red as our final colors. But to get there, we need to lay down some foundations with some color theory. Now, if you look at a color wheel, you notice that opposites attract, and when I do my general sort of bright colors, I tend to use a sort of shadow, which is the opposing color. I did it with my Lamenters in the last video, if you've seen that. I used Luxian Purple as the sort of underpaint for the yellow, and that works really nicely just to get a bit of deepness and richness to the yellow and stop it looking green. In terms of the red, I like to use a green underneath the red. In this case, I'm going to be using Militarum green, which is quite a sort of drab looking green in this case. It's not too vibrant, but I don't want this red to be too bright generally. So we'll start off here by splitting this miniature into 4 quarters, opposing quarters, which are going to be in the Militarum green and Luxian purple. You don't have to be too neat at this step because we are going to go over this. This is really just a sort of underpaint, a shade or shadow that is going to build up the color later on. Moving over to the Nova Marines, these guys are awesome. I really do like this chapter. I believe they're an Ultramarine successor chapter, of course, and they do look fairly Ultramarine in general. These guys are also quartered between a nice bright blue and white. I'm going to start off by base coating the entirety of the miniature with Apothecary White. This is to build up the white on the quarters later on, but it's also a good foundational shadow for our blue as well. Apothecary White is an absolute must-have if you're painting whites or greys on any of your miniatures at home. Apothecary White as a contrast paint is just flipping awesome. For the Star Phantoms, these guys are pretty much all white with some black trim details. I'm going to cover the entire miniature with Apothecary White as well, just like the Nova Marine, and I'm using a large brush here just to get this down quickly. For our Sons of Medusa, the successor chapter of the Iron Hands, and I believe the only successor chapter of the Iron Hands at the BADAB War. I could be wrong on that one. We're actually going to start with a darker foundation here, and I'm going to choose a metallic green rather than a flat matte green in this case. I just feel like it's going to work quite well next to the other ones, which are all very, very matte. I'm using a very similar technique to any metallic armor that I've done in other videos recently, and that is to use a very, very bright silver, this time Stormhost silver, as a foundation to lay down our metallic contrast paint. I'm using a makeup sponge here with a little tip on it just to get into some of those cracks and crevices, but essentially we're only hitting the top areas of the armor panels, and the rest of the miniature, the shadows, will most definitely be black here. I want really, really high contrast. For the Firehawks, these guys are pretty much the English flag in a lot of ways. They are sort of bright silver with a red cross generally, and they're pretty cool looking and also very, very easy to paint up. I'm starting this one with a black prime as well, and we're going to go in with a large brush and hit the entire miniature with some Heavy Metal by Army Painter as the foundational base coat. I've chosen to use a brush here instead of a sponge because actually I want to coat most of the miniature, and I'm really kind of doing a sort of over brush here. So although some of those deeper recesses will still remain pretty dark, it's not quite as high contrast as what we saw with the Sons of Medusa. Back to our Howling Griffon, we have quartered the green, which is going to be red. Trust the process here, guys. We're now going to apply the Luxian purple, which is the foundation for the yellow quarters on this Howling Griffon. Again, you don't have to be too neat here, just make sure that you cover any areas that are white because these will show through later on if you do give them a miss. Back to the Sons of Medusa now, you can see that that bright metallic silver has dried. We're now going to hit it with a contrast paint, and in this case we're going to be using orc flesh. I'm going to douse the entire miniature, everything except the helmet, with this bright vivid green now. I really enjoy the simplicity of metallic armor schemes like this, particularly on Space Marines. I just find it's really easy to achieve, and it's very effective with really high contrast results. Moving back to our Firehawk, I'm then going to do a dry brush of a sort of mid-silver here. In this case, we're going to be using Lead Belcher as a dry brush all over the higher points of the model. Quite a liberal dry brush overall, just to catch any of those raised areas and start building up the metallic armor here. Again, this is quite a wide area dry brush here. It doesn't need to be too neat and tidy here. We're really just trying to catch the bulk of the miniature with this mid-silver now. With our foundational shadow of green and purple on the Howling Griffon, we're now going to start building back the white, again ready for our contrast paints later on. Really, I only want the purple and green in the most deepest of recesses to create that richness. So I'm going to start with Wraithbone and start sponging over the top of all of this. You might think this is kind of ruining most of the work that we've done, but again, the green and the purple are only supposed to be in the deepest of shadows here. Likewise with the Star Phantom, this guy is then going to be hit with the sponge of Wraithbone as well. Of course, wait for the Apothecary White to dry completely before you do this step because you don't want things to be too smudgy, but really dampen your sponge a little bit here because you want things to be fairly smooth. I don't mind if I get a bit of texture through doing this, but we don't want things to look too chalky either. And again, I'm hitting all of the upper areas of the model generally, any areas that might have direct light on them. Any areas where the Apothecary White dried too thickly are now kind of smoothed out by the use of the sponge here. Over to the Nova Marine, we're going to do exactly the same process on this guy as well, building up the white in exactly the same way we did with our Star Phantom. Going straight back to the Star Phantom here, we're going to get White Scar and we'll do a light dry brush just on the sharpest edges of this miniature. You'll see that I don't do too much dry brushing generally, but I feel with white it is something that really does help make things pop and bring the edges out a little bit more. Don't be too heavy-handed with this dry brush because we don't want things to look too chalky. Back to the Fire Angels, we're now going to do a final dry brush of a very bright silver, in this case back to the Stormhost silver, and this is going to be a final sort of highlight just on the absolute most highest of edges on this miniature, just to make things look really nice and pop on this metal armor. Don't go too crazy with this because this bright silver is very bright indeed. We want to focus on areas like the helmet, the hands, and any other protruding areas. Back to the Sons of Medusa, I actually chose to do 2 passes of the Orc Flesh on this armor as the first one wasn't quite bright enough. We're now going to mask out the entirety of the helmet in Wraithbone as well. A nice thin coat. You can do several coats here if you want to, but try to make the paint as thin as you can here because it will benefit and stop making it look too thick and chalky. So with the Howling Griffon and the Wraithbone over the top of everything, you can still see the purple and green in the absolute deepest recesses here. This is our foundation for the red and yellow quarters that we're about to do now. It's fairly easy to split things into quarters, really. We use the belt as the sort of midpoint on these miniatures, doing a leg of each color. Then we move to the top of the miniature. Of course, splitting the helmet in half is probably the most difficult area, but just take your time. You'll see already though, as soon as I start applying this yellow, it looks really deep and rich and bright and lovely. Of course, just double check as you do these quarters that you are getting them opposed. You do not want to be accidentally covering half of the miniature instead of doing it in quarters. So just make sure that you've planned your quarters and that they're the same throughout the miniatures as well. You want to make sure that the left top corner is always the same color, etc. Onto the Nova Marine. This is much the same really. We're going to lay down Ultramarine's blue contrast paint into the quarters of this one as well. The top left pauldron and the half of the helmet there, as well as the right leg in this case too. Ultramarine's blue is a really nice kind of darkish blue. It's not too cold, it's not too warm, it's just a really nice balanced blue. With the Imperial Fists yellow down and dried on the Howling Griffin, we're now going to do the red quarters, and this time I'm using my favourite red from Citadel, Flesh Tearers Red. A nice blood-rich red, not too bright, not too dark. This one is a real banger. We're going for rhubarb and custard here, and I feel these two colours are perfect for it. On the Fire Angels, we're going to mask out the trim on the shoulder pads and any other little details that we want in red with Blood Moon Red from the Army Painter John Blanche series. This is a really nice translucent speed paint that I've used in a few other videos, and it just looks like blood basically. It's a really rich, fiery red, and this is a nice alternative to the Flesh Tearers Red that we used earlier as well. I'm using this just straight over the pauldron. I'm not putting down any foundational colour here. It's just going over the metallic for a metallic red finish. Take your time, steady your hand, and just work your way around the pauldrons here. I don't want too much red on these miniatures, so I've chosen just to do the edges of the pauldron trim. Now to start unifying things for the entire squad, we're going to do all of the metal areas, grenades, weapons, and anything like that. We're going to use heavy metal from Army Painter here. Going back to the Sons of Medusa, now that Wraithbone helmet is dry, we're going to hit that with Apothecary White too. With our rhubarb and custard dry, we're then going to hit up all of the leathers with some Gorthor Brown as well, just to mask out the belts and any pouches and things like that on these miniatures. Rattling Grime contrast paint across all of the metals on the miniature now, and that's going to be it for the gunmetal and grenades and things like that. You'll see me use Rattling Grime a lot. It's just such a versatile and awesome paint that I tend to use as a wash, really, a heavy wash to dull down my metallics. I don't want them too bright. I like them dark and rusty looking. Our Star Phantom is looking pretty plain at this point. He's looking a bit like a Stormtrooper, so let's add some black to the mix with Abaddon Black. This is for the gun casing as well as one of the knee pads and any little areas that I want to add black to, like the pipes on the side of the helmet as well as the back of the knees and in the elbows, etc. too. Taking the Abaddon Black, we're then going to move to the Sons of Medusa to do the pauldron trim. Take your time, be careful, and use a small brush here just to get round the trim. I find that just doing something like this really breaks up the colour, particularly when you do a metallic scheme like this. It can look a bit flat and dull if you're not careful, and just breaking it up with some edge pauldron trim is a really good way of doing that. Back to the Star Phantom and indeed the rest of the squad, we're going to do some gold areas, and this is going to be Emperor Gold used across the squad on the belt buckles and any other gun casing, ammo casings, things like that as well. Over to the Nova Marine, we're also using the Emperor Gold to do the trim on the pauldrons as well. I just feel like this splits up that flat looking blue at the moment, and again just makes things look really nice and pop. I didn't mention it earlier, but with the Howling Griffin, Rhubarb and Custard Marine, we actually did the pauldron trim with a mid sort of silver lead belcher, I believe in this case. Again, just to break things up a little. They are depicted with having the silver trim in a few cases. For the tabards on all of these guys, or loincloths, or whatever you want to call them, we're then masking those out with Wraithbone as well. And again, this just further unifies the squad together. We're then going to use Seraphim Sepia all over any of the gold areas as well as the tabards too. Making sure it doesn't pull too much in those recesses. We just want to add a sort of tea stain and aging to the cloth. For all the black across the squad, I'm then going to go in with Corvus Black, which is actually a very dark turquoise. It's very subtle and you don't really notice it at first, but it just adds a bit of depth and richness and stops the Abaddon Black looking too flat and boring. A slight highlight of Wild Rider Red onto the rhubarb areas of the Howling Griffon now, just on the sort of upper points of the miniature, sort of stippling it on as you were onto the raised areas of this miniature. I'm using a sort of brush here that has fairly splayed points on it, you know, a splayed tip, just to sort of add little areas of stippling to this model. Uriel yellow is used as a sort of slight edge highlight on the yellow areas, the custard areas of our Howling Griffin as well. I felt like the blue on the Nova Marines was a little bit too flat, so I added an edge highlight with this as well. I'm not actually sure which blue this is, but it is a Citadel one. Apologies, I don't have the name in front of me here, but this is just added to give a little bit more richness to the blue. I then decided to go in with some white scar and just edge highlight any of the most sharpest features on the white parts of the Nova Marine here as well. Again, just to sort of separate the white from the blue a little bit. And I found that with the Mark 6 helmets at least, they are a lot harder to split down the middle because they are a rounder sort of shape. Going back to the Fire Angel, we're actually going to pick out some of those edge areas as well with the Stormhost Silver. We did do the dry brush earlier, but I feel like it didn't add quite enough to the edges of the miniature. So I'm just going to go in and do it manually. Also picking out any rivets on the gun casing and any other areas at the miniature that I want to sort of break up with a tiny bit of detail. With all of our miniatures base coated and highlighted at this point, we're then going to go in with some transfers. I'm using the Red Corsairs transfer sheet here, and rather than using the actual emblem from the Red Corsairs, I'm using some of the other sort of glyphs and shapes that we get on the transfers. They're all pretty cool looking, to be honest. I have no idea what any of them mean. And of course, it's pretty damn difficult to get any of the chapters of the BADAB War, aside from maybe the Salamanders. If you want transfers for them, it would cost an absolute fortune. So these guys are heretic and they're still wearing their old colors, but they have the Red Corsairs sort of insignia on them as well, just to bring them all together and unify them under the banner of corrupt piracy. I always use micro set and micro sol on my transfers. Check out some of my other videos if you want to learn more about micro set and micro sol, but they will change your life. Do not do transfers with anything else. For the Fire Angel, I went with a bright red transfer, which pops pretty nicely on this otherwise dark miniature. It's also a very different red to the red on the pauldrons too. While the transfers were drying and I was applying the micro sol, I then went in and did the bases with a bit of texture paint from Citadel. I believe this is called Martian Iron Earth or something like that. It's got lots and lots of grains in it anyway, and it just is the sort of foundation for my general basing across this army, which is going to be a very rusty, dusty, sort of orange and yellow base. But at this point, things are looking pretty damn good. Moving on to our weathering step, we're going to use some oils here today. I've chosen not to use Goons Grime or Streaking Grime or anything like that. We're going to go traditional. We're going to use an oil wash, which is sort of just made to the ratio that I want here. So what I've got in front of me is 3 different oil paints. We're using about 3 parts of Payne's Grey to 2 parts of Burnt Umber to 1 part of a black here. So triple the amount of Payne's Grey to black. We want this thing to be, you know, not too dark overall, with a slight brown muddiness to it as well. And this is actually going to be used on all 5 of the miniatures, despite some of them being darker and some of them being lighter in tone. I want to unify things through this wash. People often ask me how much mineral spirits you mix with your oil washes and stuff. It's really completely up to you. I just kind of do it by eye. It really does depend how thick you want your wash. If you make a very, very thin wash, it's going to have less of an effect. And if you make a very thick wash, you're going to have to spend more time removing it generally. The key thing here though is that you mix it properly and that there's no globbits of oil in your oil wash. So spend some time really smoothing out your oil wash and making sure all these 3 colors are mixed together fully. Now the Star Phantom, I have to say, is probably my favorite so far. I haven't painted white in a very long time, and so far it's looking pretty cool. And I'm a little bit nervous applying any sort of darkening weathering to this guy. To be honest, I was going to do some sponge chipping. I've decided against it because in the past I've gone overboard and I've ruined white armor through doing sponge chipping. So I've decided with the Payne's Grey, the Burnt Umber and the black in here that we've got a nice soft recessed wash that I think is already working well as soon as I start applying it to the miniature. Now, previously I've been using cotton buds to remove oil washes and stuff from my miniatures using the reductive technique. I hate cotton buds. They always leave bits of fluff on your miniatures that you have to go in and get later on, and if you miss them, they turn up on photos and just ruin your day. So I went to Temu and I got some beauty supplies. These are eyeshadow applicators. They are disposable and they have a sponge soft tip on both ends. They are fantastic. They're very soft and they are, you know, not as abrasive and they don't leave any fluff or residue behind either. So I'm using these from now on instead of the cotton buds. They're really, really cheap. You can go to Temu. I got, I think, 200 for about $5 or something. They are phenomenal. Anyway, I'm going in with one end completely dry here and just taking off any residue. I'm then going to dip in the other end in some neat mineral spirits, just sort of take off some of the super wetness, and then we're going to sort of remove any of the areas that we want, really to your heart's content. You can go as crazy as you want here and remove as much as you can, but generally speaking, all of the oil wash is going to settle into the deepest recesses, making this white really, really shine. With the oil wash partially drying for a couple of hours here, we're then going to go in and do some more advanced weathering here. And this time I'm using a very, very bright orange, a black, and the burnt umber from before. We're not going to use the Payne's Grey in this instance. We're swapping that out for an orange. Now we're going to do some rust and grime streaks. This is a beautiful way to finish a model, especially if you're doing an armor like this, which is predominantly white and otherwise fairly boring. What we're going to do is get an old brush, and we're going to dip it in the paint, and we're just going to create a few dots around the model with the orange, with the brown, and with the black. Now, don't go too crazy, don't add too much, but if you do, it's not too much of a problem because we can remove this with the mineral spirits, and that is the beauty of using oil paints. You want to try and be as random as possible here as well. Don't try to make things uniform because it just will look a bit rubbish. Now, once we've added enough dots to the mix, we're then going to dip our brush in a little bit of mineral spirits, and we're going to feather these down in the way that gravity would work. So towards, from up to down, we're just going to feather the oil paint out and create some streaks. The more mineral spirits that you use, the more you will remove and the lesser the effect is going to be. If you want nice thick streaks, just do it with a sort of clean brush with no mineral spirits on it, or just very minimal in terms of the mineral spirits. But yeah, you can see on the pauldron here with the burnt umber, I'm just sort of like dragging things down with the side of the brush and removing some of it with my finger as well at times. You can just keep playing around with this for ages because really the drying time on oil paints gives you so much scope to just keep on playing until you get it exactly how you want it. I also like to put several different dots next to each other, different dots of color next to each other, and sort of blend them together too. It just looks really cool. I just find this is such a satisfying way to add weathering and aging to a miniature without going overboard. You know, you could do the sponge chipping all around the edges, but often when I see other people on YouTube doing white armor and adding weathering to it, they often go far too far with the chipping. For the eye lenses, I have sort of done the middle of the eye lenses with white scar very carefully, and then I'm going in with Ethermatic blue, which is a nice vivid turquoisey blue now, and just filling the eye lens with that blue just to make things look really, really nice and glowy. You don't need to do anything more here. That's all I'm going to do with the eye lenses. On to basing. We've got two different types of pigment powders here, and this is what I use for most of my miniatures for Necromunda, 40k, Horus Heresy, sometimes even Blood Bowl 2. We're going to start off with the orange, a bright, vivid, sort of rusty orange here, and we're just going to stab this into the base as much as possible, making sure that we get some on the feet and the lower parts of the legs as well. I'm using an old stippling brush here, a ruined brush, because you don't want to use your best brushes for this. We're just dipping it in the pigment directly and applying it to the base in a very rough motion. Then I move on to the yellow, and I just add this to a few key areas just to add some variation in light and tone. I like to add the yellow. I feel like it really does take this one step further and makes these bases look far more interesting, and it makes them not all look the same as well. If I just pick one or two spots of yellow and just sort of blend that in with the orange, it just looks really, really nice. Lastly, we're going to do all our base rims in Abaddon Black. I always do base rims in black because it just makes the orange bases pop so much more as well. I just feel that bases rims should always be black, unless of course you're old school and you want to do Goblin Green. I'd say it wouldn't probably suit these miniatures as much as some Old Hammer perhaps, but you're welcome to do so. Okay, so there we go. The third squad in the series of my Bad Boys of BADAB how do you like them? Which ones are your favorite? I'd love to know in the comments down below what you thought about this video. I'm pretty happy with the results overall, but I've definitely got my favorite. Let's start by just going through them all though. Firstly, we've got the Nova Marines. I think these guys look pretty awesome overall. I'm particularly happy with the Sergeant in this squad. I do feel though that the blue I probably could have gone a bit further with. I feel that blue is a little bit boring looking. Perhaps some more highlights to it, or perhaps some more weathering. I'm not really sure. But overall, I think the vibe and the general tone of the Nova Marines has been encapsulated pretty well here. For the Howling Griffons, again, similarly, I think they look pretty good here. And again, I'm quite happy with my choices on colour on these guys. I will say, though, that I definitely prefer the Lamenter being all over yellow. I feel that the red isn't quite as strong in this instance as the yellow is, but it is what it is. For the Fire Angels, I'm pretty happy with these guys as well. These were the least effort out of the bunch, in fact, really. They are just super, super simple and quite effective, really. I think the weathering and the oil paints, and particularly the orange, actually, in this case, added to key areas, really does make these guys look like they are properly metallic. Again, in some of the lore, you see these guys with slightly brighter silver armor, but we're going for Grimdark here, and I'm pretty happy with the results. The Sons of Medusa, I chose a metallic scheme here, and I'm not sure I prefer it to a matte scheme. Perhaps next time I will do a vivid sort of acidic green matte scheme for the Sons of Medusa, but I wanted to try something different, and with 4 others in sort of matte, well, I suppose 3 others with matte schemes, I thought it was best to stick with a metallic. However, these are probably my least favorite of the bunch, but I do like the way that the helmet contrasts with the dark green on these guys as well. And again, using that orange oil paint really does make things work quite well. For me, though, the absolute star of the show is, of course, the Star Phantoms. I haven't painted white armor in a long time because I've been a little bit scared about messing it up, quite frankly. I did a World Eater recently for one of the Raptors that I was going to put a video out on, and I ballsed it up massively, just going too far on the sort of edge, sort of weathering and things like that. I went too much with the sponge. This guy, I think, these are looking awesome. I'm almost tempted to do a Star Phantoms army at some point. I really do like the aesthetic. They look like stormtroopers from Star Wars, but yeah, I'm just overall really excited and happy about these guys. The white and black, soft sort of tones. It's slightly chalky, but not too much. I really, really enjoyed how these guys were so simple to make as well, honestly. Very, very similar to the Fire Angels, actually. These guys were the least effort out of the bunch. Not much to think about. You just need to try and keep that white looking clean. And I think in this case, it certainly does. Very happy with the Star Phantoms and pretty happy overall with the squad. Here's the family shot now. We've got 5 different schemes in one squad on my Sector Mechanicus terrain. Anyway, again, let me know your thoughts and comments and criticism. Always welcome here. I'm pretty happy with this series so far, though. And of course, I've still got 3 or 4 more chapters from the BADAB War to do. But I'm running out of miniatures here, guys. So it'll be nice to know what to paint next. Perhaps I'll get some more Red Corsairs Raiders and paint those up in the schemes of, say, the Raptors and the Red Scorpions, among others as well. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this one. Please do like, share, subscribe, and check out the Patreon as well if you'd like to support me further. And stay tuned for my last part that will be coming real soon. Peace out.